Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Cho Nam-Joo. Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, is the story of a 33-year-old South Korean woman. Although she used to work at a small marketing agency, Jiyoung is now a stay-at-home mom with a 1-year-old daughter. Her life is unremarkable, except that she has begun to rather disturbingly take on the personalities of other people, talking to her husband, Taehyun, as if she is her mother, and even taking on the personality of a friend who died not long ago. She begins to send him weird text messages, and to make dishes that she neither enjoys nor is good at making. After a disastrous visit to his family during the holidays, when Jiyoung scolds her in-laws in her mother's voice, Taehyun convinces Jiyoung to visit a psychiatrist. The next section of the book retells Kim Jiyoung's story from her birth, up until the present day. Each step of Jiyoung's life is colored by her gender, and the ways girls are taught to defer to and to be less than boys. It's in the way her brother, the youngest child and only son, gets his own room, while she and her sister and grandmother have to share. It's when she starts primary school and learns that girls must wait for boys to finish eating lunch before they are allowed their turn in the school canteen. It's her father telling her off for the length of her skirt and for smiling at strangers when the strange boy follows her off the bus one night. And in the way Jiyoung took forever to find a job because companies preferred male employees, only to lose a job she loved because it became impossible for her to stay after she had her baby. In her family and in the classroom, as a girl, a young woman, as a worker, as a wife and mother, Jiyoung is set upon, harassed, belittled. She's expected less of, or more of, and eventually the postpartum depression and the sheer hopelessness of her situation prove too much for her, and her mental health deteriorates alarmingly.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Literature for Equality Project, where we are using literature to discuss gender equality. I am Hani Ahmad, one half of the Two Book Net Stalking podcast.
And I'm Diana Young, the other half. You've been listening to a summary of Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, which is the book we're going to be talking about today. Kim Jiyoung is a book that came out in South Korea in 2016. Not only was it immensely popular, it even made it onto the silver screen. But it's the book we're talking about today, and it's a book that is credited with sparking a huge Me Too movement in both Korea and China.
It is one of those books that if you are a reader of some kind, you would have heard of because it was so huge. Like you saw it everywhere, like in bookstores, on websites, on lists, right? And I know that this is a strange way to describe a book, but I felt that this book was very Asian. It's just the point of view, it's the way the narrative is written. It is concise, it's to the point, it doesn't mince words, it doesn't go into huge descriptions, but really wallops this impact. And it's also a little weird for those of you who are used to reading fiction because some parts of it reads like a case study of a person's life. It also has a lot of footnotes with statistics. It's got news articles and reports that the author inserts in order to support what she is writing. It feels a little bit like a thesis. Somebody wrote a thesis. But oh my God, the feelings it brought up in me, I was angry reading some parts of it. At this poor woman or what she had to go through. And yet, what's even more horrifying is that it doesn't feel at all like fiction. It feels like these are things that are literally happening around us and somebody finally put them down on paper.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why it just went so viral around the world. Most of last year, a lot of people were talking about, have you read this yet? And you haven't read it yet, what are you waiting for, basically? The author Cho Nam-Joo says she wanted to write a story about the institutionalized sexism that kind of like permeates all aspects of Korean life. Even though Kim Jiyoung is a made-up story, everything that she goes through are things that women have actually gone through. Maybe it's because it's Korea and it's such a weird partly traditional, partly really hyper modern society that it feels like it's so weird that this is still happening. But if you really think about it, there's a lot of things that happen in this world that we think we should have been done with. Why is it still happening in 2021? But it still happens, right?
Yeah, why are we still doing a gender equality project in 2020?
Yeah, why are we still talking about this? So even the name Kim Jiyoung is like a really, really generic name. If you say like Ali bin Abu or something like that in Malaysia.
Fatima binti Abdullah.
Yeah, the kind of thing that we always put in textbooks. So Kim Jiyoung is supposed to be the Korean equivalent of Jane Doe. So she's like meant to represent the experiences of the Korean every woman. But I think so many women throughout Asia just understood this. It just resonated so well all across, I think, even into the Western world. This is the perfect book for us to start talking about what gender equality means and just why it's something we need to work on. And that's the theme of this episode.
Yeah, definitely, Diana. And the fact that it says born in 1982 sets it very firmly in our present. Just like what you were saying, right? Korea is modern. People aspire towards the kind of success that Korea has had. And it's definitely a richer, more developed country than Malaysia. And yet, look at how archaic some of their gender sort of like inequality is. I always felt that Korea at one point suddenly became this huge superpower because they decided that, they are going to compete against Japan, who will, of course, colonize them at one point. It is quite amazing what Korea has done to reinvent itself in maybe the last 30 years. Because 30 years ago, you would never be eating kimchi jjigae or watching Korean shows. But now, everybody knows it. And it's not just Malaysia, it's the rest of the world. Anyway, back to gender roles. The preference for boys to lead, for example. There's a huge gender imbalance after China's one-child policy when we're talking about, East Asia. And in Korea, it led to thousands of girls being given up for adoption. And many of them are adopted in Western countries. And, I never really thought about it. And I remember at one point, it was almost fashionable to adopt a Korean baby, especially in America. Because I remember, I think it was Sex and the City or something, Charlotte adopted a Korean daughter, right?
Oh, yeah. You notice that a lot nowadays because so many of these young women are actually coming of age now. They're getting to the stage where they're getting very prominent in a lot of countries. Like, we have athletes who are adopted who are now going to the Olympics, and, you have people who are celebrities and stuff like that, and they're talking about their experiences. I think Korea has had this history where, like so much of its tradition and culture is so male-centric. And it's such a big deal. Right now, even though they've gone past a lot of it, it's still something that is affecting so many women even up to date. If you're somebody who watches K-dramas and you enjoy the pop stars, you might be thinking, there's no way women aren't living a much freer and more equal life in modern Korean society, right? That's the thing, though. It's easy to miss a lot of ongoing systemic inequality because it just becomes a part of ordinary life. We don't see it in our society. We probably see it in other people's society because, it's easier to see it when it's something that's unusual to you. Which is why it's interesting when you pick up a book like this, which examines society different from ours. You can really see really striking contrasts. Like, for example, when Jiyoung and her sister Eunyoung are expected to share things while their little brother has his own. They share an umbrella, they have to share a room. The little brother has his own. And also the Korean school system. She's describing how boys get to have lunch first and they eat their meals and then the girls have to wait their turn. And because the lunch hour is almost over, the girls have to rush and they have to swallow food as fast as they can. You're sitting there thinking, wow, that's crazy. I bet we could probably think of a lot of ways where in Malaysia, we're just used to these things, right? We don't talk about them because, like what's new?
Number 1 on the roster was a boy. Everything began with the boys, and that felt like the right, natural thing. Boys line up first. Boys led every procession no matter where they were headed. Boys gave presentations first, and boys had their homework checked first, while girls quietly waited their turn. bored, sometimes relieved that they weren't going first, but never thinking this was a strange practice. Just as we never question why men's national registry number begin with 1 and women's begin with 2. Most teachers handpicked about 5 or 6 smart girls to run errands for them, grade quizzes, and check homework. Teachers were in the habit of saying that girls are smarter. Students also thought that girls were smarter, more mature, and better with detailed work, but somehow always elected boys to be class monitors.
There's also something about this book because it's written in a way that it really manages to strike a chord about the many, many struggles that women face in their daily lives. You can see that Jiyoung isn't someone who's a rebel, or she doesn't go against societal norms. In fact, she works really hard to conform to the way society wants her to act. And yet, she still can't find a way in which she can be everything she needs to be. You know, to be a good daughter, to be a good wife, a mother, and a good citizen and a productive member of society at the same time.
Whoa, don't get me started on conditioned misogyny in the workplace. I mean that part of the book, right? How employers would have to consider, like, not hiring a woman because they don't want to invest in training a woman because they believe that once a woman gets married and have kids, they will put family first. And many women do it, of course, but it's because many workplaces have not joined the 21st century. You know, being questioned, like in the book, on how you react to sexual harassment. There was a part in the book where you were asked, what would you do if your boss gets frisky with you, right? And then also being asked whether or not you will continue working after you get married and have children. I don't think men get asked that, but women do. And why does a workplace not accommodate people having children? Because honestly, that's what we all do, right? We get married, we have children. This is a fact of life. By offering good crash facilities, for instance, by allowing moms flexibility to breastfeed and still monitor their children during work breaks, by allowing for a more deadline-based schedule where mothers can work from home a few times a week. Because honestly, you are losing out on an intelligent workforce when you don't accommodate these needs.
When she announced her pregnancy at work, one of her male colleagues exclaimed, "Lucky you! You get to come to work late." Lucky me! I get to retch all the time, am unable to eat or shit properly, and I'm always tired, sleepy, and sore all over. Jiyoung wanted to say, but held it in. When Jiyoung fell quiet, the other male colleague chided. But she goes home 30 minutes late. She has to work the same amount in the end. Yeah, as if anyone in this office gets to go home on time. She's just getting 30 minutes for free. Jiyoung, out of anger, said she had no intention of coming in half an hour late, that she would be keeping the same hours as everyone else. She didn't intend to get a single minute for free. She wished she hadn't spoken so rashly as she came into the office an hour ahead of everyone else to protect her pregnant self from the rush hour metro hell. She wondered if she was setting a bad precedent for the younger women in the office. She couldn't win. Exercising all the rights and utilizing all the benefits made her a freeloader, and fighting tooth and nail to avoid the accusation made things harder for colleagues in a similar situation.
So I also feel that it is part of the toxic work culture, you know, of having long meetings, of having to clock in and out, of a 5-day work week. Honestly, Diana, I mean, we had this conversation before, how we are living in different times now. Because this work schedule was set about in the 30s. I think it was by Ford for the automotive industry. How can we still be using this same structure today? And the other thing that this book brings up is how expensive childcare is. Here, maybe some people can afford to have maids. But in Korea, many women are just forced to leave their work once they have children because somebody has to look after the child. So reading about Kim trying to stay in her job, which she was very good in, but also trying to please her in-laws and husband is quite harrowing. You know, I mean, I might not have experienced what she goes through, but wow, I really can relate. That whole feeling of trying to juggle everything and trying to make all these life-changing decisions without having very little support.
Yeah, so there's this sense that women find it really hard to do the right thing because all around them, there's all these different choices that are so difficult to make. For example, women who work, they feel guilty about putting their children in childcare, and then they're blamed for sacrificing their children's well-being for the sake of selfish ambition. And men feel like having a working wife makes it look like they don't earn enough. So the burden of the childcare usually ends up being the responsibility of the women. And they're far more likely to give up their jobs for the sake of the children. But women who stay at home are criticized when they don't keep their homes completely tidy and they don't make baby food from scratch. They don't teach the babies to read by the time they're one, and they don't take them to baby swim and gymboree classes. Women who don't feel happy or fulfilled wiping butts all day are considered ungrateful for the hard work their husbands do. Don't even get started on how little attention is given to the endless, unending work that stay-at-home mothers do. And Kim Jiyoung, she's denigrated in the book as a mom roach. Mom roach. I'm saying that word again.
Mom
For
roach.
apparently doing nothing all day and living off her husband's paycheck.
People call me Mom Roach. Daehyun heaved a long sigh and said, "Those online comments are written by dumb preteens. No one actually uses that word in real life. No one thinks that about you." "No, I heard it with my own ears today. At the park across the street. Some office guys, 30-ish, wearing suits. They called me that." Jiyoung told him what happened that day. She felt shocked and mortified at the same time, and she had wanted to get away that instant. But recounting the situation made her flush, and her hands shook. The coffee was 1,500 won. They were drinking the same coffee, so they must have known how much it was. "Tell me, don't I deserve to drink a 1,500 won cup of coffee? I don't care if it's 1,500 won or 15 million won. It's nobody's business what I do with the money my husband made. Am I stealing from you? I suffered deathly pain having our child. My routine, my career, my dreams, my entire life, myself. I gave it all up to raise our child. And I've become vermin. What do I do now?" Daehyun gently drew her toward him and embraced her by the shoulders. Not knowing what to say, he patted her on the back and repeated, "That's not true. Don't think like that."
Oh my God, Diana, remember like when we were discussing about this book before we did the show, I did say that a lot of this book is about guilt, about female guilt, about constantly feeling guilty that you're not being enough. And then trying to hold everything together and only to have somebody make a careless comment like that. Like you are just leeching off your husband. Like you're not, a viable member of society. That looking after your husband's child, your child, is not deemed worthwhile. Oh, I tell you, man, this book really, really hits you.
It's not just being a stay-at-home mother, though. It's the fact that society gave Kim Jiyoung so few options and choices, and then it heaps all these burdens and expectations on her, and that's what caused her to basically lose her mind.
Do you think it's because women in general just kind of get on with it? I wonder whether is that like a DNA in our chromosome that, you know what, aku buat sendiri lah. I've had conversations with my friends before. I'm married to wonderful men. I'm not saying that people are unhappy in their marriages, but sometimes they just say things like, "Oh my God, I can ask him to do it, or I can just get it done," because then it would just get done properly.
I'd like to tie this to a little bit of what we were talking about in the previous episode 2, which is the fact that boys aren't really taught to do a lot of the practical work in the household. Even though they have to eat, they're not taught to cook. Even though they have to wear dress shirts, they're not taught to iron. Even though they will also want to have clean bathrooms, they won't wash. They're never taught to scrub the toilets, that kind of thing. So women know how to do these things, but boys are just lost sometimes.
And I also think that women take it a lot upon themselves. When we were talking in the episode about, wanting to be perfect, I think there's a satisfaction in a lot of us if we can get a work done well. Oh my God, I can have a career. I can actually do this. But at the same time, I make sure that my family has a hot meal every day. There's that sense of achievement that sometimes women put upon themselves, like it's very satisfying having a list of things to do and ticking them off. I'm not sure whether it's the same for men. I mean, these are things that you think about when you read a book like this. This is the end of part 1. For discussion topics and some fun activities, go to rngdr.com/LFE. This is part 2 of the Kim Jiyoung Born in 1982 discussion. In part 1, we touched upon institutionalized sexism in daily Korean life and got to know Jiyoung a little bit. In part 2, we talked about how women before us pushed the boundaries of gender, as well as our own nerdy takeaways from reading this book. Listen on. There are also other fascinating women characters in the book. Her mother, Mi-suk, for example, is incredibly productive. Exactly this kind of woman I'm talking about, right? That just gets things done. And she's industrious. She pulled her family out of poverty. She's the one who invested in things and bought property. And she's always looking for ways to supplement the family income. I mean, the father just seemed to be a genial man who just lets his wife take charge. She is also the smartest person in her family, but she couldn't go to university because her family couldn't afford it. Instead, she had to work to give her brother money to study, and she even had to have an abortion when she was pregnant with another girl. So through Mi-suk, through Kim Ji-young's mother, you see how hard women work and how much they sacrifice for their family. But usually, it's their husbands that are given credit for raising a family. And this is something that really kind of hit me hard because I felt that I could be pretty hard sometimes to my own mom, who gave up being a welfare officer to raise me and my siblings, and how small her world kind of became, when she just looked after the household. I'm not here to question her choices because I think she was happy with the choices that she made. But yet, she pushed the boundaries a little further for me because she gave me choices. And it's good to remember that each generation of women make it a little better for the next generation. And we really don't think about that enough. The fact that girls in this country are educated like boys, get to vote, hold office, work is because the people before us work extra hard to make it happen. That really kind of came across to me in the book, like what Mi-suk did for Kim Ji-young.
You know what you were describing there about your mother, honey? That's kind of like the catch-22 of any woman of working age nowadays. You have this idea that, if you don't go out and work, you're not fulfilling your potential. But at the same time, you're constantly feeling guilty because you're not there for your children. You feel like, I want to be like my mother who gave up everything and was like the perfect mother, We even had this term in Malaysia, Ibu Mitali, because it's like this idea that we have, like a mother who gives up everything for her family is the ideal that we want to emulate, right? This book kind of brings out the way society kind of puts this kind of pressure. They make women make these impossible choices, And I think that's the kind of thing that so many women are struggling with nowadays.
The job did not pay well or make a big splash in society, nor did it make something one could see or touch. But it had brought her joy. It afforded her a sense of accomplishment when she completed tasks and climbed the ladder, gave a sense of reward knowing she was managing her own life with the money she earned. But it was all over now. That's how it turned out, even though she wasn't incompetent or lazy. Just putting the care of your child in another's hands doesn't mean you don't love your child. Quitting and looking after your child doesn't mean you have no passion for your career. In 2014, around the time Kim Ji-young left the company, 1 in 5 married women in Korea quit their job because of marriage, pregnancy, childbirth, or the education of their young children.
It used to be that we would have extended family living with us so that you could still go out and work because, you would have people be there. Even I think my own experience is that, my family lives really far away from me. My mother-in-law is much, much older, and my husband is the youngest son in her family. So by the time I had children, she was like, No way I'm looking after kids anymore.
I'm done.
Don't come to me with that. I'm done. So I respect that. I mean, like, it's my kids. I have to look after them. But then she'll say things like, like, I never went to school. But my daughter-in-law, she has a degree, but all she does is sit at home. So,
Oh my God.
yeah. So when it comes to Kim Jiyoung, you can see that kind of thing that we put on women. Like, her grandmother always put her little brother first. Her grandmother enforced this system in their household. The girls have to help the mother with all the housework. And once the food is served, the father gets served first. And then the little brother. And then grandmother. And then mother. And then the girls. So it always reminds the girls the men go first. Always reminds the girls that women are meant to be last. You're never equal to men. And this is something that really, really hit home to me, because it is a cultural thing that we're still holding on to. I think it's a lot less nowadays. And I think that girls nowadays understand that, even if they have relatives that say this to them, it doesn't hit them as much. You still have people who have mothers-in-law who tell them things like, you can't make your husband do things for you. If your husband comes home from work, you have to have all the food ready for them. If the house isn't spotless, then you're not a perfect wife. And why are you working so hard when you're not even looking after the thing that is most important in your life, which is your family? So this idea that boys are the rice bowl of the family, without men, the family has no income, no security, and women should always defer to them because they can offer that safety net. Family unit is centered around the man. This is something that is very much still a part of traditional kind of ideas. And I think we're kind of phasing it out in this generation, but we have to work on that. So have a listen to this passage from the very beginning of the book, when Kim Jiyoung was a young girl.
Jiyoung's earliest childhood memory is of sneaking her brother's formula. She must have been 6 or 7 then. It was just formula, but it was so tasty she would sit by her mother when she was making it for her brother, lick her finger, and pick up the little bits that spilled on the floor. Her mother would sometimes lean Jiyoung's head back, tell her to open wide, and pour a spoonful of that rich, sweet, nutty powder in her mouth. The formula would mix with her saliva, melt into a sticky mass, then turn soft as caramel, before sliding down the back of her throat and leaving a strange feeling in her mouth that wasn't quite dry or bitter. Koh Boon-soon, Jiyoung's grandmother who lived with them, detested the very idea of Jiyoung eating her brother's formula. If her grandmother ever caught her getting a spoonful of it, she would smack her on the back so hard powder exploded from her mouth and nose. Kim Jiyoung, Jiyoung's big sister, never ate formula after that one time she was admonished by their grandmother. "You don't like formula?" "I do." "So why don't you eat it?" "It stinks." "What?" "I don't want their stinking formula." Jiyoung couldn't understand what she meant by that, but she understood how she felt. Their grandmother wasn't scolding them just because they were too old for formula, or because she was worried there wouldn't be enough formula for the baby. The combination of her tone, expression, angle of head tilt, position of shoulders, and her breathing sent them a message that was so hard to summarize in one sentence. But if Jiyoung tried anyway, it went something like this. "How dare you try to take something that belongs to my precious grandson?" Her grandson and his things were valuable and to be cherished. She wasn't going to let just anybody touch them. And Jiyoung ranked below this anybody. Jiyoung probably had the same impression. It was a given that fresh rice, hot out of the cooker, was served in the order of father, brother, and grandmother, and that perfect pieces of tofu, dumplings, and patties were the brothers', while the girls ate the ones that fell apart. The brothers had chopsticks, socks, long underwear, and school and lunch bags that matched, while the girls made do with whatever was available. If there were 2 umbrellas, the girls shared. If there were 2 blankets, the girls shared. If there were 2 treats, the girls shared. It didn't occur to the child Jiyoung that her brother was receiving special treatment, and so she wasn't even jealous. That's how it's always been. There were times when she had an inkling of a situation not being fair, but she was just accustomed to rationalizing things by telling herself that she was being a generous older sibling and that she shared with her sister because they were both girls. Jiyoung's mother would praise the girls for taking good care of their brother and not competing for her love. Jiyoung thought it must be the big age gap. The more their mother praised, the more impossible it became for Jiyoung to complain.
There's so much pressure. I remember this when I was growing up, for you to have an heir, right? There's so much pressure for you to have a son. Like women who are not able to give a son often get blamed, right? I mean, the brunt of the blame falls on the women. And sometimes, especially in polygamous societies, as we know exist in this country, the inability to have children or the inability to give your husband a son means that he can take a second wife. This is a valid reason for having a second or even third wife. You know?
Or even divorcing your wife, right?
Yeah. This book is a sobering book because this kind of stuff still happens. Boys and girls, everybody out there listening to this show, do not be an enabler of accepted misogyny. Try your best to identify this and question why things are done this way or why things are said to you. You are the next generation that will make it better for the generation after. Because you got to push the boundaries a little bit more further. Especially today, right, where gender is such a hot topic. Like there are people who don't want to have a gender, who wants to be non-binary, who do not want to identify to a certain, sex or gender. Because of this, because we have this division of what genders should be. We're moving to maybe one day we might be a genderless society. I don't know, Diana. You think that might happen?
It would be like the left hand of darkness. It's interesting to note, actually, that this book came out in 2016, which is actually during the time when South Korea had a female president. Park Geun-hye was the daughter of the military dictator Park Chung-hee. And we've never actually had a female prime minister yet in Malaysia, but sometimes you'd imagine that having one might mean that things would improve for women under her administration, right? But Park Geun-hye actually made things worse for women during her rule. Under her leadership, gender inequality worsened, the growing wealth gap hit women the hardest, and the number of sex crimes rose.
Do you think because she was raised in a certain way, being a daughter of a military dictator, right?
Yeah. So it goes to show that just because women are in power, you still need to understand the importance of gender equality, because then otherwise you're still perpetuating these old traditional roles that really don't help anyone.
That is such a good point. There's also a book called The First Political Order that came out in 2020 that actually talks about how societies that treat women badly are poorer and less stable. So this book basically shows that female subordination functions almost as a curse upon nations, and patriarchy and poverty go hand in hand. A society's choice to subjugate women has significant negative consequences: worse governance, worse conflicts, worse stability, worse economic performance, worse food security, worse health, worse demographic problems, worse environment protection, worse societal progress, just worse off. Let's just put it that way, just worse off. And I remember reading somewhere that if you educate women and give them the ability to make their own money, they are the main people who raise families. So society is just generally more well off. When we're talking about ediches, we should all be feminists. If everybody's a feminist, societies would just be better off.
The book also describes the situation in South Korea, which is one of the countries that has made the most progress in reversing a patriarchal or male-centric system. In recent years, it has passed laws equalizing male and female inheritance rights and having state pensions that decrease the share of old Koreans who live with and depended on their sons. So within a generation, one of the world's strongest preferences for male babies switched to a slight preference for girls. So, that was an amazing change for one country. But obviously, I think we can still see that when you read a book like Kim Jiyoung, there's still the long-term effects of this traditional preference for boys. If South Korea can make such rapid progress, it does give us hope. One way we can all improve is to be aware and informed. If you read a book like Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, it will open your eyes a bit to the effects gender inequality can have. And you can build upon the ideas we've learned about in the second episode of this podcast series to build better cultural norms for boys too. And when boys are not expected to always be the strongest, to work the hardest, to bear the burden of having to be the sole breadwinner, to provide for their old folks at the same time, then, their lives will be happier and healthier too.
What's kind of interesting is actually to see how a book like this, what kind of response did it have in its own country. So Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, was quite polarizing in South Korea because there was a backlash against it by some men who felt it was attacking them. There are still many men who was unhappy because, let's face it, a social system that favored them for centuries is suddenly no longer in place. And many boys did not understand why it's unfair that their sisters have to give things up for their sake. And there are many men who feel it is their right to demand obedience from their wives and daughters. But research shows that the more highly developed and prosperous countries are the ones where sexism is the lowest and gender equality is the highest. So working towards a more equal society should be everybody's civic duty. Ultimately too, as what Diana says, boys will be better off in a society where their mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, friends, and colleagues are happy, healthy, and productive members of society. So yeah. A takeaway that I have from this is because we're living in strange times today, Diana, because when the pandemic hit, it's very interesting to note how work kind of changed, right? Because we're talking about gender inequality and misogyny in the workplace. So everybody now knows that it's very possible for a lot of professions to work from home, to have flexible hours, to accommodate people's domestic needs while ensuring that they meet deadlines. There are also more workplaces now that do have childcare facilities, and some are even trying to put in a 4-day work week. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but it's a start. And it is also nowadays more socially acceptable to be a stay-at-home dad. So perhaps the women of tomorrow can have careers and a family and have more equality, have better support when they're making these kind of decisions. So hopefully we are paving the way for a better and more balanced society. We want to give people hope, right? We don't want to make people feel sad after they listen to our podcast.
I talk a lot to my little sisters who are, one is working in the US and one is working in Australia. Both of them have really enjoyed working from home during the pandemic, and they're very happy that their companies actually have allowed them to decide if they want to go back to the office. So, if there's nothing else we can say has come of this pandemic that is good, this is probably one of the ways that we can probably change for the better. There are so many women who would like to do whatever they can to help support their families, but they just can't. And the end result is that fathers have to work harder, and mothers are frustrated because they can't do more for their families, and families overall are suffering for it. If we have this idea that we want to support families rather than just one man working for everyone, there's a lot of change happening in a lot of Western countries. In Europe, for example, they no longer subscribe to the idea that only men should work. I think the idea is that everyone really does work. It's just that, they will put in a lot more systems in place to help with raising children. Because otherwise, what you will see in a lot of countries where there's not support for women to raise children, women just won't have children. And that's not good for everyone because society just shrinks.
Yep. Well, it's a good thing that people are living longer, I guess. But anyway, this is going to a whole different conversation. So Diana, I suppose, read this book, yeah?
Yeah, we would highly recommend you read Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, which is a really short book. It's only 162 pages. It's a short, quick read. It gives you a lot of pertinent information. It gives you a very eye-opening look at what it's really like, across all sections of society, and having been affected by all these small things in your choices available to you as a woman. And if you're a K fan at all, K-film fan at all, you might like to check out the 2019 movie, which stars two of the hottest Korean actors, Jung Yoo-mi and Gong Yoo. And Gong Yoo is, of course, like if you're watching Squid Game, you know who he is. I have to say the movie's pretty good, and I actually prefer the movie's ending.
Ooh.
So read the book so you can compare it against the movie.
Yeah, because the book has an ending, don't worry, but it kind of leaves things quite open-ended. It doesn't really answer a lot of questions. So does the movie answer the questions that you have from the book, Diana? Does it give you a better...
It gives her hope, I think.
Oh, and hope. Hope is so important, everybody. So if you want to have further reading, because after all, we are a book podcast and we want you to carry on reading, why not check out some other books that help you explore what it's like growing up as a girl in different countries. We recommend Abi Dare's book, The Girl with the Louding Voice, which is a story of a teenage girl growing up in a rural Nigerian village who longs to get an education so she can find her louding voice and speak up for herself. And you can also check out The Breadwinner by Deborah Ellis. It's a story of a young girl in Afghanistan and how she must take on the personality of a boy in order to help her family survive. It's also an animation. You can find this movie as well.
And now that you've listened to this discussion, tell us, what are your takeaways about what the big deal about gender equality is? Do you think Malaysia is an equal society? Do you see ways in which your mother is treated differently from your father? We'd like to hear what you think, and you could win yourself some sweet prizes in our Literature for Equality Project contest. All you have to do is post on the social media platform of your choice to share your thoughts in response to this week's podcast discussion.
Indeed, and we like it to be as creative as you like. So maybe you would like to write a poem to express your thoughts on the book. We will be doing a poetry book in the upcoming episodes. And if you're not into writing poems, you could put your thoughts about the book in a TikTok video, maybe stimulate a book discussion, send us a vlog. You can also write an essay to share a vision of a future Malaysia with a fairer, gender equal society.
So this contest runs from the 17th of October 2021 all the way to the 16th of January 2022, and you are free to respond in your own way to any of the episodes in this podcast series.
Again, respond to all of our 8 books because we would like you to carry on your journey into understanding gender equality in the world you live in today. So the contest is open to any student aged between 12 to 20, currently studying in Malaysia, and there are 2 categories, young adult 12 to 16 and upper secondary 17 to 20 years old. Don't forget to hashtag Literature for Equality Contest, tag us on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, and head over to the contest page on rngdr.com/LFE to submit your entry.
This is the 3rd episode of the Literature for Equality Project, which is brought to you by the Two Book Nerds Talking podcast under the sponsorship of the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives. Do check out the other 7 episodes in the series. To find the episodes and more information on the project, including full contest details and teacher materials for studying in class, check out our website at rngdr.com/LFE.
This has been the Two Book Nerds Talking podcast with me, Hani Ahmad, and my lovely co-host, Diana Yong. She's incredibly well-read, everyone. You can always pick her brains to find out what your next great read should be. And we want to wish you a wonderful week ahead. Thanks so much for listening to us.